Afternoon's annual stakeholders meeting. Our annual stakeholders meeting is our opportunity each year to report back to our community, to our communities of interest, and to our very important stakeholders on the year that has been, and perhaps a glimpse into the year that is underway currently, and perhaps a little bit more. It's also an opportunity to hear from some great, usually one great guest speaker, and we'll introduce him a little bit later on. I'd like to welcome you all here this afternoon from diverse locations across our great land, and indeed countries, not just our own Indigenous peoples, countries and lands, but to some of our colleagues and friends joining us from Canada and other places. And on the subject of land and country, on behalf of the directors, myself and the staff of Haven Home Safe, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands upon which we all connect today and pay our respects to the elders and leaders of all of these nations, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Indigenous Australians. The format for this afternoon is pretty straightforward. You'll shortly hear from the chair of Haven Home Safe, Damien Tanguy, and then from our guest speaker, Nathan Dal Bon from NHFIC. And if the acronym eludes you, that will spell all that out for you. Then we'll wind up with a short Q&A. So if you've got questions that you'd like to ask of Damien or from Nathan, please use the chat function and be aware that my powers today are that of moderator. So, but all fair questions, we'll give them a good go. And then we'll wind up after that on time, and we will send all of the registrants who've registered for today an email with an embedded link to our annual report, which is being loaded on that website as we speak. So at this point, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the new chair of the board of Haven Home Safe, Damien Tanguy. Damien has very significant experience in property development and a very strong understanding of national, state and local government policy that impacts the housing affordable frameworks and areas that we work in. Damien has a Bachelor of Business in property, of course, and has experience in business management of a multifaceted health services business before he progressed into his own property development company in 2000. So it's 2020. Happy anniversary, Damien. I'm not sure what that is, but no doubt it is significant. Damien is also the immediate past president of the Victorian branch of the Urban Development Institute of Australia, a most prestigious position. He also serves as a board member of Remembrance Parks Central Victoria, the Bendigo Business Council, which we know as B Bendigo, and he is the president of the outstanding, I might add, Bendigo Senior Secondary College, as well as Loddon Mallee Regional Development Australia Committee. A very, very busy man who brings a lot to the role for us. Normally we would welcome Damien to the stage with a resounding round of applause, but that seems kind of pointless because we can't hear you clapping. So at this point, a simple thumbs up. Over to you, Damien.
Thanks, Ken, and welcome everyone to this unusual stakeholders meeting of ours, but we value our relationships and you're a really important part of our past and definitely our future. So welcome today. Just want to note a couple of apologies we have received from Minister Wynne. I spent some time with Minister Wynne last Thursday talking about the government's wonderful stimulus package, and he sent his apologies for this evening, parliamentary sitting week this week. Damien Drum MP and Marnie Baker from Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, the CEO of Bendigo and Adelaide Bank. And I know we have a few former chairs of Haven Home Safe in its iterations over the years with us today. So welcome to you all, and thanks again for your commitment in the journey of this wonderful organisation. I just wanted to start by saying, if we look at 2020, the year in review, 2020 before this year was often associated with vision, and Haven Home Safe has had a lot of that this year. We've maintained our clear visions and we've worked hard on strategy in what can only be described as a challenging and tempering environment. We have used all of those wonderful terms of transformation and pivoting and challenged ourselves throughout the course of the year. Ken, I just wanted to congratulate the organisation, the staff and its clients for the way they've collectively managed the outcomes that we have been able to achieve, which is what really matters, practically on the ground with support, services and housing for people. So I think we've done a good job of that this year, and I just wanted to highlight that for people. Whilst we have been working on some strategy for the organisation, Haven Home Safe remains very focused on its key principles and goals: more homes and more supports through more partnerships and more capacities, well suited to a stimulus-based environment, the four mores. As we emerge from this significant impact of COVID across our community, our key pillars remain exactly that. We're going to be delivering with more than ever to do, more disadvantage, more community need, more demand for our services, and more opportunity for us to provide. And we are geared and structured to do that. Over the period of the last year, Haven Home Safe has housed in excess of 6,500 people and supported over 13,000 people with 12 different programs and integrated with a range of other agencies. We continue to achieve very effective outcomes in our integrated homelessness support, housing service and delivery, and coordinating support services on that journey through emergency accommodation through to transitional housing to a destination of appropriate long-term housing for people. That's our key goal. 2020 for Haven Home Safe has been a benchmark year. The board has actually adopted a new 5-year contemporary growth strategy, which has been designed to deliver on those key goals and principles that have been established over time in the organisation. The growth strategy of integrated housing, services and support is well timed for this unprecedented state government announcement of a stimulus investment of $5.3 billion into public housing, driving housing outcomes and economic stimulus for the Victorian economy through to 2024. I just wanted to briefly touch on that because people may not be aware of the structure of that, but there are 6 key investment streams the government's got there. And we know already with the early look at this that Haven Home Safe will be participating in quite a number, if not all of these areas. And they are building homes on public land for around $530 million, spot purchase and shovel-ready projects of $950 million, social housing growth fund contribution of $1.38 billion. That's really significant. And Haven Home Safe is an early leader in the social housing growth fund space. We've worked through the mechanics of that. Partnerships with private and CHP providers, $2.14 billion, and sector building capacity of around $6 million. And that's very important when we look at the mechanics of the way we get to deliver these programs in conjunction with government and councils on planning and other processes, and also the finance structures and measures we have in place as an organisation that we have to work through to get housing on the ground. So that's a snapshot at what we're dealing with at the moment as an organisation, looking into next year. Over the course of this year, we've had a range of highlights through the COVID period. As an essential services, our doors have remained open through both physical and digital means. We've improvised and innovated along with our clients and partners to maintain our services and meet that increased demand we've faced, particularly in metropolitan Melbourne over the course of this year. Our Staff Member of the Year helped take us from mechanical to transformational in the IT work that was completed. And that's around the way we communicate, not only internally in the organisation, but our concierge and other services, our outward-facing client services. We had to quickly and clearly restructure so we could keep communicating and support people. And we managed to do that, I think, really effectively this year. So it was great to see some reward for the staff members involved in those endeavours. Strategic highlights over the year included the substantial refinancing of Haven Home Safe with the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, better known as NHFIC, and their CEO, Nathan Dal Bon, is with us today. That was a very substantial undertaking that underwrites the financing of the organisation and the nearly 1,500 properties that we own or manage in Victoria. We were actually the first Victorian CHP to be able to achieve this with NHFIC, and we're very proud of that fact and thank NHFIC for that opportunity. But interest savings made in this refinancing package are in the order of $1 million a year and will be applied for quite some years. And they are going directly towards an investment in community-based housing. And we are very dedicated on ensuring we've got that investment fund available through those savings. So that's been a wonderful achievement, I think, of the goals NHFIC has for those funds, and we've been able to help deliver that. We've secured a really significant opportunity in Melbourne through the Social Housing Growth Fund that's soon to be announced, but we've done a lot of work on that this year. And I think that was been a really interesting learning journey for us in advance of the stimulus announcement, so that we work out how to coordinate all the relationships of tiers of government and the funding arrangements and protocols that apply to that. And we've been able to work our way through that, and I'm very proud that the board and the organisation have really performed quite well in that learning journey, and we've arrived at a great conclusion there, and look forward to applying that learning to this stimulus-based marketplace to get results on the ground really quickly, which is the state government's intention. The other really good thing that we were able to achieve this year is a successful merger with Active Housing, and that's created within Haven Home Safe the Active SDA business unit. So supported disability accommodation is something that Haven Home Safe is really working into. We've got some really good people involved in the business now, and we're starting to forge ahead on the developments that supported disability requires, and that's a specialist form of development, and we are currently working through the delivery of a number of those. So I look forward to getting that achieved in the next 12 months as well. Today, I just wanted to recognise Sue Clark, who's the former chair of the Haven Home Safe Board. Sue was on the board for over 10 years, was chair for around 6 years, and she retired on the 30th of June this year. She's made an outstanding contribution to the organisation and has made the entree to the COVID year manageable for me as the incoming chair. But, you know, we shared wonderful time together on the board. We have a great synergy of mind, and just wonderful to see the building blocks that have been put in place at Haven Home Safe over the last number of years in government's platforming, strategy, the refinancing, all of those things, which have enabled us to approach next year with a really, really solid platform to meet what government seeks in investment in public and community housing. So I just wanted to recognise Sue and say thank you, Sue, for your contribution. In the coming year, it's really important that we work with our stakeholders in delivering our strategy, and that is in many ways building on relationships with a strategic fusion of investment logic and measured social outcomes. And if you look at the platform of ESG investing now at scale within our sector, we are developing an understanding and a language that is mated to the investment requirements of the sector. And we look forward to being a thought leader in that process. And we know that NHFIC are doing a lot of work in that area as well. And that is going to be the really strong shared journey of much better outcomes for people. And it's great to see at scale that investment market growing now to quite a significant scale that can help fund some major projects for what we say are improved community outcomes of investment. So we'll be working hard on our strategy in that area, and we'll remain focused on our longer term strategies. Stimulus is an unprecedented opportunity for us, the $5.3 billion investment of the Victorian State Government. But we have a strategy, and we need to emerge from that stimulus process with a clear focus, guidelines, and having built the next set of requirements that help us emerge from stimulus and be that strong, investment-focused and community-oriented organisation that has people as its clear results and outcomes. So, you know, I think that that says that people-focused housing and support agency for the many people and families that seek to find and keep a place to call home, that remains our strong purpose. So I just wanted to say we're very well positioned over the course of this year, having worked very hard, and we look forward to really starting to change the amount of delivery of community housing and closing that gap in conjunction with our stakeholders and other participants in the sector. I'd love to now introduce our guest speaker, who is Nathan Dal Bon. And you know, Nathan has had a strong history in investment and finance. So NHFIC was created in 2018, and Nathan's been its CEO since inception, and he's been focused on building an organisation, as we are at Haven, that improves housing outcomes for all Australians. He has more than 25 years experience in economic policy development and advising government, and previously to his NHFIC role was a senior Commonwealth Treasury official. and he actually led the team that worked extensively on the establishment of NHFIC. So we congratulate Nathan for all the work that's gone into that. But the development of NHFIC has certainly given organisations like Haven an ability to take new strategy and accept new opportunity in our marketplaces. Nathan's had senior exec roles in Commonwealth Treasury, Departments of Industry, Innovation, Science, Foreign Affairs and Trade, Prime Minister and Cabinet, and has served as a non-executive director of the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute, more commonly known as AHURI. So Nathan, with that wonderful introduction, I just wanted to say at the outset, we said thanks for refinancing, platforming us, and look at what we're facing now with stimulus opportunity. And I'll hand over to you to have a discussion about that from your perspective.
Thanks very much, Damien. Can you hear me okay? Great, thanks. Look, I had a series of questions to talk through, so I'll just stick to the questions that were presented to me. But thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you today, and thanks very much for the kind words of introduction, Damien. Yeah, certainly being involved in the setup of NHFIC now as CEO, I can't really point the finger at that person who set up the organisation and blame them for everything. So that's the only downside, I guess, in terms of being involved in the setup. We're not perfect, but we're certainly trying to learn through our experiences and improve the experience for CHPs. So in terms of what NHFIC, the first question I was presented with essentially relates to the biggest risks and challenges that CHPs face and work to grow their portfolios. And I'd have to say that in thinking about the question, it was a little bit challenging for me to actually come up with some risks and challenges, given that you've just had the big announcement in Victoria 10 days ago. I think, look, there are long-term structural issues associated with the CHP sector. They're well known in terms of the constraints to growth, and they largely relate to the funding gap. The announcement, as I understand it, the recent announcement from the Victorian government obviously is a substantial down payment in terms of addressing that constraint. I think the challenge will be how to try and leverage as much supply as possible with the quantum of money that's being put on the table, noting that a certain amount of that money wants to be put aside for regional areas, which obviously have very different finance arrangements relative to the cities, the major cities, the metro areas. So I think but there are various models that are floating around at the moment, which I think will be helpful in terms of trying to leverage as much supply as possible. And certainly NHFIC, I think, can help as a financier in terms of, and working with Victorian government and CHPs in terms of coming up with models to get that leverage. I think if there's a lot of construction happening in a relatively short period of time, there's quite a lot of stimulus out there more broadly. So there's obviously the risks associated with construction. There's the challenges associated with getting builders, getting the relevant people in place, given some of the timeframes I suspect that Victorian government will be looking at in terms of the rollout of the initiative. And I guess one of the things that are recurring issues, not so much for Haven, but I guess there's always a question of does the CHP sector have the capability to step up at scale? And I've just been through the PPP process with the Victorian Urban Renewal Program in Victoria, and obviously we've done 3 major transactions in Victoria with Haven among them. I'd certainly say that from what I've experienced, what I've seen from where I sit, I think the CHP sector in Victoria, in particular, is very well placed to step up and take advantage of the package that's been put on the table by the Victorian government. So there's some of the risks and challenges. In terms of how does NHFIC see the sector taking advantage of capital grants to deliver social and affordable housing? So I guess, I'm still getting my head around exactly what the package will look like and how that will play out in a practical sense. But as I was saying, I guess one of the key factors will be trying to leverage as much supply as possible with the available quantum of grant money that's put on the table. I assume there's going to be a focus on social. Obviously, the returns on social housing are a lot less than affordable. So from a financier perspective, I guess we'll be looking at working with the CHPs to see how we can help CHPs if they're identifying new sites in terms of the construction finance that we offer. We can lend up to 70% for the construction phase of the development costs. For the takeout, we'd be obviously looking at providing term debt. I think on both the construction and the term debt phase at the moment, the interest rates that we're seeing are very, very competitive. For construction, we typically use what we call the line of credit, which is a line of funding that we have from the Commonwealth. The financing that we have through the Commonwealth is very sharp. And then we have the term debt, which is essentially through the bond issuance. And at the moment, the 10-year implied rate for NHFIC all-in rate is around 1.6%, which is an incredibly competitive rate and would obviously help in terms of the financial structuring of the projects as they come forward. I think once we get a bit more detail from the project, we'd also from the program, we'd be also keen to look at the infrastructure facility in terms of how that could help, particularly with the new developments. How we can get the bond aggregator finance and the infrastructure facility to work together just to drive the cost of the project down. Are we taking a proactive response and engaging with Victoria to ensure the funding and projects are worked out? Yes, so we've had some initial conversations with the Victorian government officials around what the scheme may look like. We've got a commitment to continue engaging throughout this process. It sounds like there's still a little bit of detail that needs to be worked through in terms of how to structure some of these arrangements. So we want to play a role that obviously works for the Victorian government, works for the CHPs, works for other financiers. We have some, pretty basic requirements in terms of credit metrics, which do have some degree of flex, but they're fairly standard and well known. But we obviously want to work very closely with the Victorian government because we want this to succeed, and we want the CHP sector to succeed. So yeah, I suspect there's going to be fairly short timeframes for this initial phase. And I guess from a NHFIC perspective, we'll make sure that we're appropriately resourced and can provide the support that CHPs need. Probably not between the 25th of December and the 1st of January, but certainly for periods outside of that that timeframe, we're there for you. And I guess the only other thing I'd say to that is, as I referred to before, in the time that we've been operating, we've done some major transactions. We've done 3 major transactions down in Victoria. In the second bond issuance, we've got some more transactions in Victoria that are coming through. So we feel as though we understand the environment in Victoria very well. I think we understand the CHP sector very well in Victoria. And I think we also understand, the Victorian government in terms of the relationships that we have, certainly with DHHS. I just think we have my sense is we have a good working relationship, and I'm certainly keen for that to continue into the future. So to wrap it up, we're ready to go. We just had our liability cap increase from 2 to 3 billion in the budget. So we're cashed up and ready to go.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nathan. That was illuminating. We've had a couple of questions from a couple of participants that are NRAS specific, and so we're just chasing up an answer for those ones at the moment. Not specifically related to you're part of the Commonwealth largesse, can we say? Nathan, one of the things that is of interest to us is that we know that is it the mandate, and just generally there's a review of NHFIC coming sometime soon. I understand there's been some consultants appointed. Is there any concern that the mandate might shift more to perhaps focusing on, say, first homeowners, or frankly anything away from funding community housing? I mean, if there's an increased mandate, an increased opportunity, that would be great. But is it too difficult a question? Because I'm conscious that we don't want to put you too much on the spot. But what's your sense of what this review might show up?
Look, I think it's early days. My understanding is there's now some information up on the Treasury website that refers to the review, and they're getting the Treasury are getting their team in place to do the work. It's hard to say, from where I sit in terms of what the underlying motivation or agenda, that sits behind it. I guess if I was thinking about it from my sort of former Treasury days, I think there were some very clear objectives that were articulated in both the NHFIC Act and the investment mandate. So I think the starting point would be, has NHFIC achieved what we intended it to do when it was first set up? And I think that then sort of leads to a series of other questions, such as in terms of funding the CHP sector through the bond aggregator, for example. What have we actually achieved over and above what would have happened anyway? Because, NHFIC was created to essentially try to fix a gap in the market in terms of that provision of long-term finance. So what has actually played out? I think the infrastructure facility is obviously an interesting one, because we probably haven't had the same degree of success in that space. We're starting to get some traction now in terms of the arrangements we have with some of the state governments. But it's probably still not as far advanced as what we'd like. So I think it's an opportunity for the government to come in and actually have a diagnostic in terms of, is this fit for purpose? If not, what can we do to amend it? And I think I just don't get any sense that in terms of what NHFIC was originally set up to do, there's a shift to move that in a different direction. But, you never know what's around the corner, right? Just over 18 months ago, I wouldn't have predicted that we were doing the FOLD scheme, the first home loan deposit scheme, or housing research. So, I've heard in the past that the PM thought of NHFIC as being some sort of housing centre of excellence. So whether that's the case, whether it becomes some all-encompassing housing-related entity, or whether we sort of stick to our knitting, if you like, and basically focus on the financing aspects, I don't know. So it'll be an interesting exercise, I guess. And I hope that the questions, the terms of reference, will be sort of shared, so people can get a better idea of what the government are looking at.
Yeah, thanks, David. I mean, Power Housing Australia, of course, which was an initiative of this organisation way back in 2004, 2005, and in the first report that we generated was, of course, calling for a bond aggregator back in 2006, I think it was. And so we worked very closely with someone you'd know well, Marty Robinson, from who's now, I think, last time I heard, was working at our embassy in Washington. Worked very closely with Marty and Prime Minister Morrison when he was Treasurer. And in fact, one of our board directors and myself went with Nick to the States to, kind of check out the level of interest in such a beast. And we're able to report back very favourably for that. So that, we're not only very pleased to be the first Victorian recipient of NHFIC funds, but we're just absolutely excited that it exists in the first place. So this has been a great thing for us. I've got a couple of questions that have turned up, and this one is. It says, what does NHFIC consider to be the biggest risks and challenges that faces community housing providers as they work to grow their portfolios? So it's a bit of a generic question, I think, but in terms of your sort of top 5 risks or challenges that you would see confronting us? What leaps out at you?
Well, look, I think we're still in an uncertain environment in terms of what's going to happen over the next 12 months. So for those CHPs that I guess have a reliance on market-based rents, there's still a considerable question over how the rental market's going to play out over the next 12 months or so. And obviously, there's still a concern around what's going to happen with unemployment and general economic conditions. So which could put more pressure, I guess, on CHP services. I guess on the flip side of that is, so far we've seen the CHP sector be incredibly resilient in terms of withstanding, I guess, some of the pressures that we've seen over the last 12 months. In a time like this is when it's actually good to have that very low but stable rates of return that you get with social housing. I think there's the other long-standing risk, and I guess this is a challenge, and this relates. I'll step out of Victoria and just more broadly, and that is, how do you grow the CHP sector? Given the difficulties to make a particular project stack up when you're essentially investing in subsidised housing. So, I mean, Victoria's obviously put a very substantial down payment to address that issue, but it's an issue that hasn't gone away in other jurisdictions, and obviously when this initial funding runs through, then obviously we're back to where we were when we started. But obviously it'll be a good opportunity for the CHP sector to grow their portfolios. I think one of the other challenges that I mentioned before just relates to, as I say, the capability of the sector. And this has been not from within the sector, but more from the outside the sector. There's still people who sort of question, whether CHPs can really step up and take the scale that people are talking about in terms of the shortfall of subsidised housing, and also just taking on development, sizable developments. Do CHPs have the ability to take on those sizable developments, deal with all the risks, associated with construction projects, overruns and so forth? And I've seen certainly in other jurisdictions, but I've also seen it in Victoria, as I said before, I think a lot of those concerns are probably outdated in the way that I've seen CHP step up and manage sizable projects. I think, as always, with another risk for the CHP sector is basically just dealing with the policy uncertainty that can play out. There can be government initiatives, you can make plans, and then those government initiatives change. So I think one of the things that's been repeated to me quite often has been, we really want policy certainty. We've got very low but stable cash flows. If we can have that ability to plan for the long term, without this, potential disruption, that would make a huge difference to the way that we do business. So yeah, locking in sort of policy frameworks, I think, would be very helpful in terms of helping those long-term challenges. But as I said, I think at the outset, I actually sort of struggle to think about some of at least the near-term risks and challenges, because when you look at the overall environment at the moment, from a CHP perspective, you've got incredibly low interest rates. As I was saying before, the 10-year interest rate at the moment is unbelievably cheap. And now there's potentially the opportunity to acquire assets at a substantial discount, particularly in Victoria and parts of Melbourne. And you've got a sizable stimulus package on the table. So I think it looks pretty positive from where I sit. It's really now seizing the opportunity.
Thanks, Nathan. I know that Damien's got a question that he wanted to follow up with you.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Nathan, I agree with exactly what you're saying there, and you know, we've done some strategy work over the course of this year. You've met with our board and had some discussion. Some of that focuses on measuring social outcomes properly and effectively for our organisation, so we can target our investments to those better results. Your bond issues have had experience with ESG investing. I just wondered if you could talk for our stakeholders a little bit about that and how the investors see that marketplace and how conscious they are of those issues.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Damien. Yeah, certainly I mean, we've had 3 bond issuances now for around 1.2 billion. And it's been very clear from the outset when we first set up NHFIC's bonds as social bonds that there's been an incredibly strong interest in, I guess, the end product that NHFIC is financing, which is CHPs and in turn tenants, you know, low to modest income tenants. So we have a very, when we do the investor presentations, when we go through the prelude to a bond issuance, you know, we have a lot of conversations with investors, and they're very interested in knowing what it is they're funding. So because of the Commonwealth Guarantee, they're not really looking through so much from a financial perspective to make sure, you know, they're investing in something which is financially sound so much, you know, which is perhaps it's a good thing or a bad thing depending on your perspective. But certainly they're looking through to understand what it is they're funding at a very human level. So there are some investors that are always calling us and saying, look, we want more and more stats. We want to get some case studies of people that are being supported. We did a bus tour last year as well to one of the Sydney sites where we took a handful of the investors in our first bond out to one of the CHP sites, and they had the opportunity to go around and actually see for themselves what their money was buying. And they had the opportunity to talk to a lady that was essentially with a young child who was homeless, and then had the opportunity to get one of these subsidised places and manage to turn her life around. It was an incredible story and had I think a powerful impact. But you know, when you're sitting there in the CBD in Sydney or Melbourne and you're sort of working out where to park your money, you obviously have a degree of separation. So what we've invested a lot of time in is actually developing those human stories. So we've also published a social bond report just recently, our second one. We send that out to investors to see again what their funds are supporting. And if you look through that, you'll see all the, you know, the outcomes, if you like, or the in terms of supporting tenants. We have a lot of case studies that we've built into those social bond reports. And once we get, hopefully, COVID out of the way, it'd be good to do something similar in Victoria, where we can get some of the big super funds that are based down there out for a bit of a bus tour, so they can see some of the sites in Victoria. But I think the combination of the reporting and working with CHPs in terms of extracting that data, and then bringing the investors to the CHPs has been very effective. And I, as I've said before, I don't see any shortage of funds to deploy into the CHP sector. Our problem is having enough investments on the other side for superannuation investors, for example, to put their funds. And recent examples, when we issued our bond in June, it was the biggest bond that we've issued so far, 562 million. We were still more than 3 times oversubscribed, and we had substantial price compression, you know, during the book build. So, you know, they don't seem to be dropping away as we tighten the price. And I suspect the next time that we go out with a bond issuance, they'll be there waiting for us again. So it's a very positive environment, and it goes back to my earlier comment about seizing the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, great response, and that gives me some confidence that the short-term market conditions post-COVID hopefully won't dent that pool of funds that might be available. And
Nathan, when you organise that bus trip to come and have a look at the much more powerful social and community housing in Victoria than our New South Wales colleagues, of course. Not to mention the opportunity to look at integrated homelessness and housing organisations and what they do. I'll just remind you that there are, or will soon be again, direct flights from Sydney to Bendigo, the centre of the housing universe, as we like to refer to it. We're heading probably towards the close. There's I just want to check my screen to see if there's any other new questions there, and there are no other new questions. We have two of our participants have asked some specific questions about NRAS, and we will specifically follow up with both of those.
But it might be worth just making a mention on NRAS that you know, the board and the organisation have had a clear discussion that there isn't a cliff. There's a period of time over which the NRAS investment starts to change, and that we are looking at alternate investment models for the reallocation of those funds and support and the way the organisation deals with that. So I think there's a very strategic approach to the changing face of that market at the moment.
And thanks, Damien. And a comment from our esteemed, I won't use the term favourite chair because every new chair is the favourite chair, of course, but our esteemed former chair, Sue Clark, and has just made a comment that says that it would be great for NHFIC, if I read her comment correctly, to come and see the great work that's been happening here in Bendigo. Thank you for that, Sue. I'm conscious that we've hit 4:45, and in true Haven Home Safe time, we like to get things done, started on time. We like to get things where we can, finished on time. So Nathan, thank you so much. If I can thank you on behalf of the organisation, but I'd also like to thank you for your ongoing support, your support of Power Housing Australia, your readiness and willingness to talk to housing associations individually or as a group. You know, you've been beating the bushes for us all since the day you got involved. And if I could just make the sort of slightly candid observation that you are a great credit to the Commonwealth public sector, and the work you've been doing is greatly appreciated. And would you please pass on our thanks to your team, who are equally helpful, equally available. In this recent time, not everybody's been available, so that's been greatly appreciated. And I'd like to just acknowledge that for all of the registrants, as we mentioned earlier on, you'll shortly be receiving an email from us with an embedded link to our annual report. I'd like to commend you that report. I think it's one of the best ones we've ever done. Loads of graphics, not so much text, lots of links, lots of video. You can cut and paste and stack and rack and work your way through it, but it's a fabulous read, and it's a testament to the great work of the organisation. I'd like to thank Damien and the board for a great year. And at this point, we'll wind up. So thank you all. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for participating. Thank you for your questions. And we may see you again, but perhaps not in this format again. Who knows? So thank you.